Greetings sailors and welcome to a Patreon supporter spotlight, and indeed the last one of the year, possibly even the last video of the year, as it's the 30th that I'm recording this. We're going to kick this one off with Redman36, who is a name you might remember from ages past. He had to stop supporting me on Patreon for a while, but he has returned and has sent me this rather good replay. It's a recent acquisition, this ship, the Mass B, and he's been playing it a bit since, I think, earlier in December, but this is his best game to date by far, and, well, you'll see how it turns out. It is good matchmaking for the most part. There's a double carrier element in play, which is not so pleasant, potentially, but that's more of an issue for the single destroyer of the team and maybe some of the other ships with weaker AA. But fortunately for Redman, that's not the case for him. The Massachusetts does have decent AA to go along with, of course, the extremely good secondaries. And although the main battery perhaps isn't the most reliable in the world, these US 16-inch guns are still pretty meaty. They can still do a decent amount of damage, especially if, like this enemy Irian, you decide to close to medium range and then proceed to give a full broadside to shoot at. Let's see how this is going to turn out. Clearly they'd closed in to this distance to try and drop their torpedoes. We saw the deep water torps going past there, but I would not say it was worth it in the scheme of things. One of the big reasons why the Irian is just that much worse than the Kutuzov is that without the smoke, you're basically forced into sometimes being able to use islands, but because of those Soviet trajectories, not as often as US light cruisers, but more often if you're trying to fight over open water, it's going to go fairly poorly for you just because you do not maneuver well. That is not particularly a feature of Soviet cruisers, but it does have the range at least. And honestly, if you're not trying to use that range, then you're doing it wrong. And closing to very close range, so you can put yourself broadside in front of a battleship's guns, is about the most wrong that you can, you know, play it, basically. So he's pushed in, and he's actually got a Lenin with him here as well as some other cruisers giving some AA support. But that bomber strike still manages to get through, and it looks like he might take a torpedo here as well. And this, oh no, they just run out. This has to be from the enemy destroyer, the Fantasque. Or is it the... it's a French destroyer. I can't remember which one it is exactly, but it can just about stealth drop, but only just. It's got a reasonably limited range if you put the best possible stealth on it, as most of the French destroyers do. You can usually just about stealth drop with them, but with very narrow margins. So they're steadily getting this cap. There's a Richelieu on this flank as well, but they've not done a whole lot so far, so we'll see where they place in the team list, I guess. But while all this has been happening, with Redman and this Lenin pushing this cap, on the other side it's not been going so good, and the enemy are outnumbering his allies in that whole side of the map, and they've actually managed to take the middle as well, as you can see, with the Fantasque and the is that Baltimore? Actually, it could have been the Tirpitz' torps that just ran short. Maybe, I don't know. It seems unlikely though. I'm not sure what. I honestly don't know where those torps that just ran short could have. Mind you, the Fantasque is a fast ship. It could have, in that span of time, gotten over there and then gotten back. Anyway, they've taken out that Tirpitz, who was desperately trying to pull back and was not able to succeed. There's also a very healthy enemy Bismarck there, but this enemy Bismarck is going to be about as keen to engage as, well, the Richelieu on their own team. Instead of trying to help out, that Bismarck's just going to back way off up to the north and the A and B lines and basically not be relevant to most of the rest of this battle. There's another airdrop, and that was not quite able to arm, so that's fine. No more extra damage. It wouldn't have been a huge amount of damage, but of course it's always heavy damage, which means you can heal back that much less. We've got another strike coming in here as well, but it does seem like it's just the Shikaku. There's not any kind of coordination. Oh no, wait, that's the Lexington. Okay, I revised my previous statements. It was the Shikaku followed up by the Lexington, but they weren't particularly coordinating their strikes and carriers. I'm not entirely sure why the Lexington felt the need to go for him just then, given that he's next to a Lenin and a Richelieu. I don't know. Maybe they just didn't think there were any better targets. Anyway, I think that is one of the few examples where you see both carriers' planes going after Red Man in any reasonably close succession. So now they basically need to get control of the middle. And in terms of losses, you can see it's pretty even on both sides. So although the enemy team does have the numerical advantage over by sea, they haven't just ruffle stomped and murdered lots and lots of ships while they've been over there. They've killed some ships, but this is basically coming down to now who can take control of the middle and effectively keep control of the middle. Now the enemy team does have a points lead advantage at the moment, but it's not that worrying at the moment. For the time being, this is what, 150 points between them, 140. It's not that big of a gap. So as long as they can take this, then yeah, it's fine. And really the only real problem for Red Man at the moment, now that the enemy destroyer is out of the equation, not that they were that big of a threat anyway, they didn't have smoke, and there were 2 carriers in play. This is extremely bad matchmaking if you happen to be in a French destroyer. It really does only have to potentially worry about getting shot in the side from that Bismarck to the north. To the south is fine, and everything else is basically to his front. And there we go, the Bismarck does try taking a few pot shots, but nothing too worrisome really. And you can see Red Man paying a bit of attention, maybe angling a bit more that way. And he can afford to do that now at this point, because the only thing that's really in his face is that Baltimore who just died. There is an Amalfi there. There we go, more shots coming in from the Bismarck. But the Massachusetts, the enemy pair of Massachusetts and the Vladivostok are not really anywhere close enough to be a problem right now. So more planes incoming, and he's taking a thorough battering. He's up to over 1 million, which isn't that special in a battleship, but he's also lost a fair chunk of health at this point. And there we go, it does actually take a torpedo in the butt there, which is never nice. You never want a torpedo in the butt. Not unexpectedly anyway. I should stop myself before I get too lewd. But again, with him and the Lenin pushing in together, yeah, they're not having any difficulty capping this. And although he's taking the brunt of it, the Lenin's been plugging away with their guns as well. And even if he dies, that Lenin is still going to be there to cap. But it looks like he will at least survive long enough to get that cap. Now, instead of charging towards that Bismarck, he actually then chooses to turn to the south, which angles him better against the Bismarck and is going to put him within secondary range of this Massachusetts. Although the Massachusetts there, having turned to avoid a torpedo, is slowed right down. So Red Man overcooks his shot a little bit. He only gets the one, well, non-damaging penetration. It was probably in the torpedo belt or something, or maybe into an AA gun or something. I think those can register as pens that don't give damage. And this is really just him milking out as much damage now as he can get out extra, because he's down to his last heal. He doesn't have a lot of hit points, and the other Massachusetts is still very healthy. And that Bismarck has been battering away at him from the north for a good while now. That Richelieu, by the way, finally getting in towards the action. They swung south out of A. Instead of pushing into the middle where things were actually happening, they've gone south, and they have engaged with this Massachusetts as a consequence. But yeah, they still have a lot of health. It's absolutely Redman that's been taking the brunt of the battering, pushing from west to east. We can see there that Tirpitz down there has also been taking a fairly big battering. They were, I think, on the 10 line at one point and have managed to survive this long by withdrawing and using that island where they could. So one Massachusetts down, second Massachusetts to go. His heals are all gone at this point, and there's a very good chance that that enemy Massachusetts will decide that he is by far the more tempting target, just based on his low health. He doesn't actually, Redman doesn't actually have priority targets, so we don't know if that Bismarck is targeting him from the north. There's also a Vladivostok we haven't seen in a while. It's possible they're AFK, but we have no idea what's become of them. It would be awfully nice to know both where they are and what amount of health they have. Oh, and there's a very nice hit as the Massachusetts turns broadside in an effort to turn away because he's now in a 3 versus 1 situation. Yeah, nicely exposes himself for a Citadel hit, and Redman's able to take full advantage. Turns out there's the Vladivostok, by the way, who's been probably the most useless player on the enemy team, still rocking full hit points and just chilling behind those islands, not doing anything. But at least that Bismarck that went north and the allied Richelieu that went south were actually engaging, even if it was from a range, and if it maybe, you know, in the case of the Richelieu, took them a little while to get to the fight. But that Vladivostok's just done nothing. Now he aims really quite high there, but it's enough damage to get the kill. And that is his second kill, and 132,000 damage done. And he's also got an AA defense expert from having shot down so many planes. But at this point, given how damaged he is, even if he can get to cover behind an island, which he's trying to do, it's very likely one of the carriers will be able to polish him off. He really does not have a lot of health at this stage. I'm pretty sure that Vladivostok was also Faragate, by the way. So, yeah, not the most useful player on the enemy team. Really not. Nice 11 extra K health of taken off that Vladivostok there. An extra bit of damage done. Not quite enough to tip him over 150k. And it sadly seems like this is going to be his lot because, yep, here come the Lexington dive bombers. And although his AA gunners shoot down quite a few planes there, including some fighters, I think, it's not enough. The single strike that gets through is able to finish him off. So there ends Redman's game, but the match isn't quite done yet. They are, however, on track to a very nice victory. They've got control of the middle. The last couple of ships are scattered around the place, and in the case of the Vladivostok, more or less useless. So it's basically the low health Bismarck and the carriers. And I don't think the rest of his team is going to have that much difficulty. The Lenin, you can see, has also gotten pretty damn beaten up, although they do seem to have a heal available. And the low health Tirpitz that they had down south has fallen victim to a carrier. So this is still, you know, if the enemy carriers really pulled out the stops, this is still potentially doable. But yeah, it's unlikely given how much of a lead they had. And that Vladivostok actually managed to die to the dead Tirpitz's torpedoes. So nice bit of extra damage for that Tirpitz. So there we go, Richelieu kills the Bismarck, and it's now just the carriers. But although that Lexington, I almost said Leningrad there, that's not a carrier. That's not a carrier brain. Although the Lexington does take some damage before the end, there isn't enough time to kill either of them, and it ends with them hitting 1,000 points. So, 143k damage. He got the Dev Strike, he got First Blood and the AA Defense Expert. Almost well, actually just over 2.7k base XP. A very respectable result. And the Lenin is actually in second place there. That Lenin did really quite well also. And yeah, the enemy of Vladivostok, maybe not so much. Yes. But what can you say? The battleship stereotype does exist for a reason. Sometimes you meet those players in battleships and it's oh so noticeable. Lastly, a very healthy profit from that one. It's also a premium ship, obviously, and I don't know what flags he had on it, but overall, a pretty nice result. For our second replay, we come to Manti 111 in the Zhao, the Tier 10 Japanese heavy cruiser. Although, of course, these days there is a heavier cruiser, but Zhao still packs a bit of a punch when it's used right. It's still quite a good fire setter. Although there are other good fire setters in the game, of course. It's definitely not unique in that regard. It's one of those things where there's only so many roles you can give cruisers that are reliant on HE. And so over time, those cruisers have become a bit more, well, not interchangeable exactly, but yeah, it's more striking the ones that don't have HE, and they're a bit of a mixed bag. Because on the one hand you've got the Minotaur, and on the other you've got SAP. Although actually the Venezia's quite decent. I think it's, from what I remember playing the test version, it's not an unpleasant ship to play, because it's got the reasonably long-lasting smoke and quite a few guns, even if it does have a long rate of fire. But yeah, the lower tier SAP ships are still a bit yeah, they've not lit anyone's hair on fire. But we're not talking about Italian ships. I've completely sidetracked myself, which of course I never do. Instead, we're talking about this ship, the Zhao. A ship that, despite being one of the original Tier 10 cruisers, I don't actually have yet. I've been grinding the Ibuki very fitfully for quite a long time now, so I will get there eventually. But it might take me a little while, unless I just someday decide to use free XP to finish it up and take the lazy way out. But I tend to prefer actually grinding the ships. I don't think there's that many lines where I've skipped ahead, basically, even though I do have a fair bit of free XP banked up at this stage. And I do have advantages in terms of, you know, being a CC wargaming. Not only gives me premium account time for warships, but also gives me camos which are extremely good for grinding. They're not the best grinding ones, actually. The Type 59 camos that you can buy for doubloons, which are available to everybody, they give the biggest overall XP bonus. Is it like 200%? But the wargaming ones, the CC ones, which are similar to the CC container ones that we can give out to people, that's only 150%. But you know, you stack that with some of the good economic flags, the dragon signals, and you can get some very, very healthy amounts of XP. And I've said this in the past, it's one of the reasons why I very much came to prefer this game over World of Tanks, is that ability to stack flags and camos for credits or XP, or Captain XP, or free XP, or whatever you want, basically. Whereas World of Tanks, you don't have that option. All you've really got are the is it directives? I can't even remember what they're called now. By the way, that reminds me of a thing, talking about camos and things. I was sort of going to mention this at the end, but I'm kind of on that topic, so I'll do it now, whilst Manti is kiting away and trying to set fires, which is kind of what you want to do in a Zhao. I have a whole bunch of codes to give away. I didn't really give any away of my November codes, which will still be valid. And I've got December codes as well. So what I'm going to do is create a public post on Patreon. And all you'll need is a Patreon account. You don't need to support me on Patreon. You don't need to support anyone on Patreon. You'll just need an account to go and see this post and say under the post that you would like to be in with a chance of getting some codes. And what I'll do is I'll pick some random winners from whoever comments onto that post. It's basically so that everybody has a chance and it's not just my patron supporters. I used to do this with YouTube comments, and then they completely removed the ability to send messages to people via YouTube directly. So, you know, you're then asking people to put their account names in or put emails in, which, you know, they might not necessarily have wanted to do. So it's a lot easier where I can just directly PM people and say, right, you've won a code, here is your code, rather than having to go to the comment and say, right, I need your server and your username, and then I need to go to the forums for that, and then I need to do the PM there and make sure that it's actually the right person and they're checking the messages, and then I need to send the code once they reply, and it becomes a bit of a faff. A little bit of a faff. So, yeah, because not everybody even uses their Warships forum PMs or ever uses any of the Wargaming official forums at all. So it's just it's easier for me. This is just I could, you know, be pimping my Patreon generally here, but it's not that really. It's not. I'm not trying to be sneaky and psychological. It's literally just I'm lazy and it's easier. Anyway, mind you, that's exactly what somebody who was trying to be sneaky and reverse psychological would say, so I wouldn't trust me. Although I wouldn't trust me anyway. The person that came up with Caption Guy is clearly not an entirely healthy and sane individual. So yeah, basically we've had more long range HE. This is a standard game. It looks like a fair few of each side are pushing into each other on this western flank. Manty's team is kind of staging a bit of a fallback apart from this Yamato who's gotten themselves stuck face first and is going to have a hard time trying to get around. And there is a Shima on that flank, which Manty wasn't actually able to really do any damage to, and they lost their own Shima that was over here to that player. It's a rare sight, a Shimakaze player that knows how to use their guns, but if you have the health advantage, then, you know, you can land 2 or 3k salvos a go. It's just the rate of fire that you don't have with the Shima. So it really is up to that carrier if they want to be safe from a wall of Shimakaze torps. Manty, meanwhile, just has to stay out of the limelight, and he does have a bunch of battleships ahead of him who are taking the attention rather nicely. The Massachusetts isn't faring so well, but the Yamato's still in fairly good health, although given that they are reversing, it makes them a prime target for the Shimakaze. And there's also this Vanguard, which is not the most amazing ship. It's not terrible. But personally, as much as I don't particularly like the Hood, I would take the Hood at tier 7 over the Vanguard at tier 8. It's just, I don't know, Hood, at least I kind of know what I'm getting, and Hood is very tanky for being a tier 7, and Vanguard can't quite match that, especially in a tier 10 scenario like this. So the Yamato's in serious trouble now. The Massachusetts has managed to get themselves into a position where they can pull back, and the Shima's torps are mostly going to miss, but, you know, mostly isn't completely, so they've taken one, and once that Yamato goes down, or did they completely miss, or were they just able to pop a heal? I don't know. We didn't actually get a look at that. Manty wasn't looking at that moment. It looked like one of those torps was going to hit, but maybe they didn't. So now it's just targets of opportunity. The bad news is, however, that the eastern flank did not go that well. So although they were able to do this withdrawal and inflict some reasonably serious damage on the ships that were trying to push up the western flank, because the eastern flank hasn't held, that puts them rather in danger in the middle here. Especially as there is a destroyer at play, an Akizuki, which of course has got those nasty fast-firing guns. So there goes the Yamato at last. They lasted quite a long time considering the position they were in. But the enemy Yamato is about to meet a similar fate, as has the Charles Martel that was just behind them. Now this is a bit risky at this point, just being in the middle here at all. The Massachusetts has fallen back. And being here, well, I don't know if this was intentional or if this was just overcommitting, but it's a rather awkward situation. Because you've got ships on the east, which still haven't been spotted yet, but they have to be coming this way. You've got that full health Richelieu pushing up. There's Seattle somewhere. And it really is just this vanguard that's kind of saving Manti from taking any serious damage right now. Although, as you can see, some people are actually targeting him. Now there goes the GK, and finally there turns up the lower health Richelieu. But fortunately for Manti, he gets unspotted at the point where that Richelieu is pulling into a position where they could actually hit him. Well, at least unspotted for a brief moment, because here come the carrier planes. So both fighter and defensive going up. It seems to be the Vanguard that's the main target there. That iceberg, by the way, completely came out of nowhere. Yeah, I don't know if that was just a kind of panicked turn because he thought the GK was aiming at him, although it turned out that it was the Vanguard, of course. But either way, it put him up against that iceberg. That's now costing him rather dearly. He's popped a heal, but the Akizuki's got his side with AP and has actually taken a rather nasty amount of health off. And because it's AP, it counts as heavy damage. So that's not good in terms of future heals. However, that Akizuki seems to have forgotten that the Zhao has torpedoes, and in fact they don't seem to have put out any torpedoes themselves. So that's one less rather dangerous threat out of the way. And while this was all going on, that Richelieu could have been also trying to do him a nasty, but they stopped behind that island. I'm not entirely sure why, and they're only now just trying to reverse out. So instead of perhaps trying to push in and cause more problems for Manti, he's gone away with it to some extent. He still took a nasty amount of damage from the Akizuki, but he is otherwise doing okay. So they're containing this. The enemy team still has one more ship than they do. And Manti is now, in theory, in a bad spot in that he has no allies that can support him. But as long as the remaining friendlies can defend the cap, and there we go, they've killed the Shima. And, well, if this enemy Richelieu also forgets that the Zhao has torpedoes, which they do, suddenly this doesn't seem like such a bad position after all. And now all that's left is that one remaining damaged Richelieu, the Seattle, and the enemy Shokaku. So over to the AP shells. But sadly this Seattle turns away, isn't giving broadside anymore, so he flips back to HE. Doesn't want to give his position away just yet, because I think at this stage he's decided maybe he's going to look for the carrier, because the carrier was last spotted down here. Although then decides, well, this is me guessing, of course. I'm always guessing. Sometimes people give very detailed descriptions of what exactly they were thinking and doing throughout a particular game, but more often than not I might just get a short paragraph. And even when people do give a big long screed about, you know, a breakdown of what they were doing moment by moment, generally speaking, by the time it comes to recording, I've forgotten most of it anyway. So, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that point other than my brain is a bit dirty. So there's the Shikaku. They've lost their own carrier, but it doesn't really matter. They are slightly ahead on points, but yeah, it's that beat up Richelieu. The Seattle coming in from the other side, and the Shikaku has blundered right into him. I don't quite know why the Shikaku is like, they were last seen heading west, and they must have turned around at some point, and then they were coming up north again. But he'd been firing at the Seattle, so his presence was known at that point. Maybe the Shikaku just wasn't paying attention in terms of what their autopilot was doing. I don't know. It is Shikaku, by the way, with the Halloween skin. Appropriately spooky looking. Don't see that one very often. But although they're nice to look at in port, and I have a couple of the Halloween skins myself, I don't ever really use them. So it's actually going to be a torpedo that gets that final kill. And all that's left now, well, we can see the Richelieu, very low health. Once they're dead, it's the Seattle, and the Seattle's never going to carry this. The Vanguard and the Mass B, actually, you can see they're in division. Also, I mean, like, Manty's done a lot. He's approaching 200k, but those two players as well have made equally important contributions, and their carrier did a bit as well, but didn't actually get any kills. But they did help take down that Shima. Without that spotting, this might have been a different story. So trying for a final kill, but he doesn't quite have the rate of fire here, so yeah, it's one of the battleships that gets it instead. But even so, 195,000 damage and a very close result indeed. It did come down to just a couple of players making all the difference there. And although he did a lot, well, it was actually that Vanguard that managed to place first, because they were in a tier 8, in a tier 10 game. So having said what I said about the Vanguard, that allied player really made it work. Or at least well enough to survive to a critical point in the game. And it's not like they were hiding behind islands or anything like that. Still, though, that dev strike on the nearly full health Richelieu, that was also a really important moment as well, because if that full health Richelieu had been thrown into the mix, if they'd been able to start pushing up and putting pressure on those remaining ships, this might have been a very different story. So, I will, as I mentioned with the codes, I'll put a link to the Patreon post in the description below, so you can go and grab yourself some there. And as I said, it's like 2 months worth of code, so I've got a few to give away, so your chances are probably fairly decent. Otherwise, I just want to wish everybody a Happy New Year, Happy Hogmanay as well, and I hope that everybody has a good start to 2020. Although that might not be true if you're living in Australia right now, because it is on fire. But, you know, in which case, let's hope 2020 involves being less on fire, I guess. Anyway, so on that oddly topical note, let's finish things there. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you can do all the usual things down underneath it. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.